Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome Eelke Kleijn. I hope I am pronouncing your name correctly. Welcome to the shooting gallery on Phever.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that's pronounced correctly.
So I'm close enough.
Yes.
Well, you're being broadcast live now from Dublin and all around the planet via our platform. It's a pleasure to have you here. And the reason you're here, firstly, is because we're trying to restart what the shooting gallery is. It's a music review and kind of topical debate program with DJs and producers, but it's usually homegrown people that we have sitting around the desk, and we've had to rethink this due to COVID. So we're going to start bringing in some of our syndication partners, and we'd like to welcome you as our new syndication partner, which is it Days Into Night?
Days Like Nights.
Days Like Nights.
Yes.
Nights. And I've had a listen to some of it here. I am familiar with your productions, but just as a little intro to our listeners out there, tell us what sort of what you focus on with that, and it's also a label of yours. What do you focus on in that podcast?
Yeah. Well, it's a combination of things. Of course, I'm playing some of my own tunes, but my own music is quite melodic and sort of always nice on the melodies. And with the podcast, I'm also branching out a little bit towards house and techno. It depends a little bit on my mood every week. But the podcast is a little bit broader in sound than just my own productions.
How do you classify your own sound? And I know you probably hate that question.
After 20 years, I still don't have an answer to it. No, I'd say like I am playing melodic house mostly, and then branching out a little bit into techno and into deep house, but always with a melodic element to it.
I think we actually got sent one of your recordings. I think it was from South America, but I could be wrong. It may have been even in Spain, or I know it was a Spanish-speaking country. And we had this. Phever is going about 6 years now, a little over. And this was one of our early podcasts that we got sent, just to help us build up the, in the off hours, what did we play? And you were being introduced by a guy speaking in Spanish, and I think it was actually definitely on that side of the world. The set reminded me of an early but evolved progressive set. There was a lot of kind of sunshiny, long, deep, melodic tracks. And this, I guess, would be before the more recent melodic techno and melodic house movement. So you've always had that kind of melody going on. And I guess you were probably heavily influenced in the 90s by that kind of Renaissance-y sound and what came out of the UK, etc., and the US, I guess, as well. At that time.
Yeah, definitely. I guess if you look all the way back, my earliest influences were the trance sound, in the late 90s, 98, 99. And I quickly got more interested in progressive at that time, so Digweed and Nick Warren and Hernan. And I guess from that, I have sort of evolved, because I wouldn't say my sound is the classical sort of progressive right now. But you can definitely still hear that's where my influences come from.
It's melody driven, and like bass line, big warm bass lines.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just jump back. We're going to use some time, and as part of my Origin series, I want to go back to your early influences before you were DJing, and obviously growing up in Rotterdam. Are you still based in Rotterdam?
Yes.
Tell me about what was going on, in your teenage years before you decided to put on a set of headphones. What were you listening to? What were you influenced by?
Mostly, I guess in the, I'm from '83, so the earliest music I sort of remember is late '80s, early '90s.
Yeah.
And that was the Euro. Yeah, the Euro house at that time, So that's really what I remember, like taping cassettes to, and Hathaway and Two Brothers on the Fourth Floor and all that. Very, very pop music, at the time. But I was 7 or 8, so you can't. Yeah. So that makes
the scene in Holland and the scene all around Europe was way ahead of its time as well. So you've got some great influences there, and I'm sure a barrage of different things going your direction. Is there music in the family?
A little bit. Like, I was the first one to start play piano, but my mom picked it up afterwards, And if you look out a little bit further, like uncles and so, there's definitely some classical piano in the family, you know. But I was sort of the first one to really do something with it in my little group.
And how did it form for you then? Did you decide, obviously, did you start becoming a music collector, or what was it firstly the music that came to you, that you just wanted to be involved in playing and perhaps composing music? When did that kind of kick in, or what came first?
That was around when I was 12. I was just in high school, and I was getting keyboard lessons for music class, and my teacher said I could play really well for someone that had never touched an instrument. And apparently that stuck with me, and so I started bothering my parents about maybe taking keyboard lessons, you know.
You say that in such a nice way, bothering.
yeah, well, you know, because I was a kid, so one week you want karate and the next week you want soccer, and so they I think they gave it a few months, but I was still asking after that, and they bought me a keyboard. And maybe 2 years later, I started working at the store where I had my keyboard lessons.
Okay.
And they basically, you know, they had all kinds of gear, so groove boxes and synthesizers and lots of Roland stuff. And they basically told me you can take whatever you want home as long as it's back in the store on Tuesday morning when we open, you know.
Wow, that's like a gift shop.
Yeah. So I was from then on, I was every week I was bringing in, you know, Roland synthesizers and MC303 groove boxes and those kind of things. And that was sort of what kickstarted it.
And they were tricky enough little things to work properly, those groove boxes. They weren't that intuitive, I found.
Oh no, not at all. And I learned them really well. Like I could program tunes on them quite well after a while. Although I don't know if I still could today.
Yeah, because they weren't as, you know, they needed a little bit of time and effort to get them right.
Yeah.
You made good use of that time in that store.
Yeah, for sure. And I spent a lot of time recreating famous songs on those, you know, like doing your own sort of remixes of famous songs, and that helped a lot in the beginning.
And was there a moment of time that you could pinpoint, or was it gradual, when you decided to move towards electronic music and composition of electronic music, or was that just a natural evolution of where you were at that stage?
Yeah, mostly natural. I didn't really like guitar music at all, so everything I listened to was electronic.
Yeah.
And so just going from you know, playing on the piano and on the keyboard to trying to write some electronic tunes was sort of the next step for me.
And then how did DJing come about? Was that on a natural follow-up to, okay, what am I going to do live with some of these tracks I picked up, or you know, what was the evolution of that?
It was pretty much around the same time, you know. I was 15, 16 maybe, and I was just going out to clubs.
Yeah.
And I still remember going out to a club here in Rotterdam, and the DJ was like queuing records, you know. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, "Ooh, that's what I want to do," you know.
And side of it,
yeah. So the making music and playing music just went hand in hand.
And when did you decide to pick up a set of Technics? I guess did you start building up a vinyl collection, or what way did it work out?
Yeah, right away. When I was 16, so I saw them play in the club, and within a few months, I had one crappy CD player and one. It wasn't even a Technics. It was a cheap Stanton player.
Whatever works.
Yeah, but it was just enough to go from the one to the other and back, you know. And that's
So tell us about the scene then. You know, Netherlands has been way ahead of a lot of countries. You must have been surrounded by some heavy influences. Were there any big hitters that really influenced you, or was it just something you had to figure out on your own?
I think the biggest influence for me was we had this party in Amsterdam called Earth, and it was once a month in the Melkweg, which is still going strong right now. Yeah. And they just invited everyone on a monthly basis. So, you know, one month it was Nick Warren, and then the next one it was Anthony Papa, and then it was John Digweed, and then and so on. And that sort of shaped my sound, I think. This was when I was 18, 19 years old or so, and I just got introduced to lots of progressive house at the time. And that I think that was the biggest influence for sure.
So tell us about then your own career. How did you start to make it a career? did you decide to devote your life to music, more or less at that point, and get into productions and get into releasing? Just tell us a little bit, as an overview of because there's a lot of hurdles out there, and a lot of people are probably afraid, especially now that the market is so saturated. It would have been fairly saturated as well for you.
Yeah.
It's hard to break through. You kind of need to find your sound, and most producers don't find their sound straight away anyway. They just put out, if they can finish a track, they just kind of target whatever they can get it. Did you have any strategy, or was it similar for you?
Yeah, similar. Just make what you can and release what you can. Although I have to say, so my first releases date back to 2002, 2003. So this is almost 20 years ago now. And I think that, like you said, the saturation wasn't really there yet at that point, I was surprised how easily I could get in touch with record labels and send them demos, and also got like positive responses pretty soon, as soon as I started sending out demos.
It's not like that anymore.
No, it's different. There's just a lot more competition. Although if you do create something that really stands out, I think there's still a great market for it. But that standing out is the difficult part now.
And to get it to that stage, I was watching one of your interviews on online, and you were talking about your own process, and I guess that's evolved over the many years. But you attempt to, as such, finish a version of a track and park it, and then maybe come back to it in a few weeks or with a fresh pair of ears and retweak that. Is that still something you would do for most tracks, or is it, as you're going along, I guess sometimes you need to park something for just to give your mind a break? Tell us about your own process and how you're building tracks and finishing them.
Yeah, it's pretty much what you described. I've so in my early years, I would often work on a single track for 5 days or so, and then at the end of the week, it was finished, and you send it out, and it got released. And what happened a lot was, 2 or 3 months later, I'd listen to that tune again and think like, "Ooh, maybe I'd done something differently," or I don't really. Sometimes I just didn't really enjoy it at all anymore. So nowadays, my whole production process is based on that. I want everything to sort of stand the test of time.
Yeah.
And for me, that takes a few months to really realize if something is amazing or not. So I park it for a while, and then I come back to it, make some adjustments, park it again, and that's sort of how I work on a lot of different tunes at the same time.
And I guess that the last 2 years must have been difficult because you've no way to road test things.
Yeah, it's weird.
Tell us about your own COVID experiences in regards, being a professional musician, professional producer, and a touring DJ. That's a real kick in the stones. What's happened to the whole industry worldwide hasn't been easy, and a lot of guys have been sitting on tracks. Tell us about your own journey in the last 2 years.
Yeah, with ups and downs, I guess. Yeah. So I was pretty much playing every weekend, before COVID, going from gig to gig and from tour to tour. And that all stopped in March 2020. All of a sudden I didn't have any gig for 5 months, which in the beginning was annoying, but at the same time it was, all of a sudden I had so much time to make music, and I was halfway done with an album. And I spent those first 4 or 5 months just finishing off the album, So those months weren't all bad. Yeah. But then when it looked like it was going to last a lot longer than everyone sort of hoped for, it was getting more difficult, And I think a lot of artists, myself included, have sort of, you've got a little bit of depression and a little bit of the other side, I'm always sort of ups and downs. But I noticed in the COVID period, those downs become bigger and longer, and the ups aren't really there anymore. And so I'd say
I think mental health for artists has been a very overlooked factor, because you're sitting there looking at half finished tracks and fully finished tracks, and there's nothing you can really do with them, because if you release it at the wrong time, it's not going to have the impact that you need.
And you sometimes in the studio you feel like, what's the point? There's no dance floor. Like I just wasn't in the mood between October and December. I wasn't in the mood to write any music at all, and I hardly finished anything in that time. But then, from January onwards or so, maybe it's probably a mental thing, but the start of the new year, I was doing a couple of nice tracks again, and so yeah, the whole thing was with ups and downs.
I guess sometimes a break is good for everything, you know, but so long as it comes out positive. I see, thankfully, that you've announced some gigs this weekend. So tell us what's happening this weekend, which is a really positive upside.
Yeah, fortunately, I'm having a full agenda again, you know. So every weekend I'm out flying over Europe and playing, and this weekend it's Bulgaria on Thursday. I'm playing Sunland Festival, and then on Friday I'm doing a boat party in Paris. And Saturday I was supposed to play a festival here in the Netherlands, but all events got cancelled for the foreseeable future, unfortunately. If you want something by me, I'd say Control. It was out on my album, so it's been out for about half a year, but it's definitely one of the favorites from the album. If you want something brand new, for instance, from the label, I'd say to pick Alone, because that was released just 5 days ago. Okay. So it's completely fresh and new, but it's not by me, it's by Fatsushi.
Okay, I could feature possibly both of them. So just as a review of your own track, Control, just tell us a little bit about that track and the thought process behind it, and the kind of kit it was made on, etc. Let's appeal to our bearded geeks out there.
Yeah. So Control was one of the latest tracks that I finished for my last artist album. It was written completely in the COVID period, and it started because I felt like I still needed a sort of breakbeat dance tune on my album. Yeah. And a lot of tunes like this one, they start on my modular synthesizer, and I was sort of messing with that melody, and I had the melody within seconds. Like, I remember telling my wife, like, oh, I'm going to be in the studio, and then 10 minutes later I was like, oh, I have a melody, can you listen to that? And that melody was literally the one I finished the song with, you know. But what took ages was the right way to produce the drums and the bass and all that, because I went through a couple of different versions with different drum sounds and different bass lines, and I wasn't really happy with all of them. Yeah. Until one morning I came up with this one, and I really finished the tunes quite quickly. There's some vocals in the tune.
Sometimes it all works, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. There's some vocals in the tune as well. That's me on vocoder.
Is it?
Yeah, it's me. Yeah, it's I vocoded. I recorded myself and then vocoded it with Isotope, the vocal synth. Yeah. And I used my Supernova as well for some layers, and so it's all me vocoded.
Great. Well, I'll let you know how the voting goes around the table, and how you get on with your other contenders.
Awesome.
Tell us what's coming up. What have you got to look forward to? Hopefully the gigs remain, and is there anything highlights coming up over the next few months in regards to live things and release side of things?
Yeah, so DJ wise, my schedule looks pretty good for this summer. Basically I'm playing every weekend until September, and then September I go to the US for my US tour. So we look at it on a week-to-week basis, because some things all of a sudden come in and some things drop out, you know, with regulations, but it looks like it's going to be a good summer. Music-wise, we're still releasing remixes of my latest album. So Frankie and Sandrino remixed a tune that's coming up in about a month, and then we got Mano Latouf as well, remixed one.
Another Irish band.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I'm a big fan of both of those actually. So it was I pretty much wrote down my list of people I would like to have work on my tracks, and these two were very high on the list, and I was so happy they both agreed.
I'll have to annoy you for some promos.
Yeah.
Have you played here in Ireland?
I have, but honestly, the last.
Thanks a lot, mate, and I'll talk to you again.
Thank you. Cheers, man.